And it looks like we've got Danielle, Thomas, and Torian on the phone or on the line. I'm going to unmute your mics, but if it gets noisy, I'll mute you. So right now I have unmuted everybody. Let's see how it goes. So Danielle, I think I have you unmuted. You're self-muted, so that's okay. You're unmuted now. All right, so we have Danielle, Thomas, and Torian. And if it gets noisy or if there's too much feedback, I will mute folks. All right, well, thanks for joining me, and the purpose of tonight is to review the revision syllabus based on, and I'm going to mute folks because I can hear the background. The purpose of tonight is to review the changes to the syllabus as well as the expectations for you as you move forward with your observation in early literacy environments. So I've received some feedback from folks who were saying that they were struggling with being permitted to do any type of assessment on site. I recognize that that is probably problematic for some of you. You're able to do your observation hours, but you might not be able to do or conduct a literacy assessment. So I have reworked the expectations for this Capstone project to address the same types of objectives, but to get you addressing the expectations, but to instead have you go deeply in the area of assessment and literacy. So I'm going to share with you how we're going to go about doing that. So let's start with Blackboard, and if you go to Blackboard, and I'm going to just walk you through this. If you go to Blackboard and you go to course content, and I'm just navigating. If you go to Blackboard on the left side and you go to course content, you will see the first folder, and this is for the folks, you guys who are doing your observation hours in K through 2 environments. Some of you might be in a pre-kindergarten classroom, and that's okay. So we'll say pre-K through 2. But this is going to be your folder. So you will click on this folder, and you will see a ton of resources in here. You'll be expected to review all of these resources, etc. But the expectations for the course are listed, for the assignments for the course are listed under Capstone Project for EDU 683. So in order to access that, you're going to click on that tool, on that Word document. And I hope we'll show this my screen here. Okay, and the Word document provides an overview of the expectations for these assignments for this Capstone course. Okay, so I am going to actually jump to where folks have the most questions, which is the end. So a lot of you just want to say, well, what are the expectations? Begin with the end in mind. So we're going to start with the revision to the syllabus based on the calculation of your final grade. So if you go into the syllabus, you'll see that the IEP group project is worth 100 points. You will still be doing that IEP group project with all of the students who are doing their observation hours in the K through 2 setting. So that assignment will remain, and the expectations are set forth in the document that I'm sharing with you. You'll see where it says transition plan. I have a big red line through that because that is being replaced with the individual write-ups of the IRIS modules, which are worth 100 points. And I will be reviewing the expectations of that in this document in a moment. The next thing that remains the same are your weekly reflections and reactions. Make sure you're getting those done. Make sure you're getting them done within the timeline, and make sure you're getting them done based on the expectations set forth in the syllabus. That means you're writing a comprehensive reflection that is 500 words, and you are making at least 2 200-word responses to your peers. This is a large percentage of your overall grade, and it's imperative that you keep up with it and you get that done. You will also be responsible for doing the 20 hours of volunteering in an inclusive and/or special education classroom. You will be expected to keep a written log. That written log I shared with you via Blackboard as well as an email, and that is also worth 100 points. And last but not least, the replacement assignment for the career and/or vocational assignment that was listed in the syllabus is going to be replaced by a subgroup resource review that is also worth 100 points. So let's get started then. That's kind of the end of the Capstone Project document, but I just wanted to go right there because folks are saying, okay, well, just tell me what assignments are being replaced in the syllabus. The assignments that are being replaced are the transition plan and the career and vocational assessment, because if you are teachers working in early childhood environments, you will not be conducting those assessments. So now let's scroll back up to the very beginning. And let's look at what the overall components of this early literacy assessment learning module and group assignment will consist of. Part 1 will consist of individual learning that each of you will be assigned via these IRIS modules, and we will I will assign you randomly. So all students who have indicated that they are doing observations in K through 2 will be assigned randomly to each of one of these modules. The next part of this assignment, this overall capstone project, will be a subgroup resource review. That subgroup resource review will be, you'll be assigned into 2 groups, and I'll explain that in a minute. You will then be expected to review a webinar and review all materials that are in Blackboard under in the folder that I just was showing you. And last but not least, you will work as a group to develop an IEP. So let me go through the components of this capstone project. All of these projects are leading up to you developing the IEP as a group. So you have a responsibility both as an individual and as a member of the group to do your legwork. You cannot go into the development of the IEP cold. The expectation is that you will have done the legwork. Okay, so I am anticipating, based on the phone conferences that I had with each of you, that there will be 8 members of this K through 2 literacy assessment IEP group. There might be more, there might be less, but I'm anticipating 8. That will be confirmed after the webinar tonight when I send an email to folks saying, these are the people I believe are in this group. Please, and these are the assignments that I'm going to set forth for you. So member 1 will be responsible for the learning of the IRIS module called Classroom Assessment, an Introduction to Monitoring Academic Achievement. I've posted the URL as well as the questions that the individual member of this group will be responsible for writing answers to. So you will complete this module. It's an online webinar. And after completing it, you will answer these questions. So if you were Angela and you were in this group, you're member 1, and you were assigned classroom assessment, you would be expected to review the materials and then share with your group members comprehensive answers in writing to these questions. You will also submit via the direct submit folder in Blackboard your answers to me. So you'll be expected to share your responses with the members of your group, but you'll also be expected to share your answers to these questions with me. So each of these modules, and you can see member 1, member 2, member 3, member 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. As I said, I anticipate 8 members in this group, but we'll get that confirmed tonight. You are expected to review the modules. The hyperlinks are associated with the title here, and you're expected to answer the questions associated with those modules. I will randomly assign students to each of those modules, and the expectation is that you go through the module, you do due diligence to the content, and you are then able to answer the questions, and you share your answers to those questions with your peers. Okay. The second major, remember the whole point of this is that you're building your understanding of literacy and assessment. You're building that understanding so you can move forward with ultimately developing an IEP. So the next component is a review of 2 excellent resources that are going to help you with determining how to write goals based on early literacy skills, as well as considerations around assessments. So freereadingorg and interventioncentral.org. So I will randomly assign group members 1 through 4 the free reading resource and group members 5 through 8 the Intervention Central resource. You are expected to provide a comprehensive written review of the Free Reading and Intervention Central websites in addition to summarizing the tools available via the website. Each subgroup will be will answer the following questions. How might this resource, whether you got free reading or interventioncentral.org, support you in the development of early literacy assessments, present ed levels, and or the development of IEP goals? What tool did you find the most helpful on the site? Specifically address how you might use that resource. So these are pretty comprehensive websites. Free Reading really addresses early literacy development, provides a nice scope and sequence of how to introduce the early components of literacy, and will help you in the development of goals based on a progression of students' understanding of phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And interventioncentral.org provides a place where you can develop curriculum-based measurements to assess things such as phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, sight words, comprehensive oral reading fluency passages, etc. So the second assignment would be in this subgroup. You are going to review these websites and you're going to comprehensively address these two questions. The following rubric is how I am going to assess you in these two areas. Remember, these two assignments, both the individual review of the IRIS modules and your comprehensive write-ups, as well as your subgroup resource review and your answering to those questions, are taking the place of the transition plan and the vocational assessment that's identified in the syllabus. So the following rubric is how I will evaluate you in these areas. Remember, both assignments are worth 100 points. Your individual write-up of the IRIS module assignments, if you score advanced, it means you would be comprehensively answering all the questions, and you'd be making connections to your personal experience. Proficient means you'd comprehensively answer all questions and provide a comprehensive summary of all questions. Basic would mean you'd superficially answer all questions, and below basic means you didn't answer the questions. For your subgroup resource review, advanced would mean provided a comprehensive summary of the resource and expertly answered questions. Proficient would mean that you provided a summary of the resource and sufficiently answered the questions. Basic provided a limited summary and provided incomplete answers to the questions. And below basic would be provided no summary of the resource and didn't address the questions. Okay, so then part 3 is where you will then review all of the materials that are found in Blackboard. And I'm going to share with you where those are. I'm going to show you if you go to Blackboard, and as I said, you click on Early Literacy Assessment and Goal Development. In this folder, you will find a whole list of resources. These are resources to support your learning in this area. And the expectation is that you are doing this work yourself. You are going through this content yourself. And you're supporting your learning in those areas. Okay, and then last but not least, as a group, you're going to develop an IEP utilizing the PDE endorsed IEP format. You're going to develop an IEP focused on utilizing the present ed levels that I provided you, and I'll share with you where those are. And you'll demonstrate learning from the literacy module by incorporating research and evidence-based practices throughout the IEP. So basically, the IEP will be the culminating activity that you as a group will do together, and the goal is that you comprehensively are going to address the needs of this student, and you're really going to demonstrate in this IEP your learning throughout all of this module. You're learning through your individual assignments, through your group assignments, through the materials posted in Blackboard, and lastly, the culminating activity is the IEP development. The IEP development and how it will be scored is taken directly from main campus's rubric, and this is the rubric that was initially in the syllabus that you received. So those are still the expectations, and that is still the syllabus for that. And then at the bottom, our conclusion is the calculation of the final grade. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to close out this document. It's Capstone Project for EDU 683. And I want to see if anybody has any questions. In order for me to answer your questions, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to unmute each person's mic and see if you have any questions to date or as of right now. So I'm going to start with Anita. Anita, I'm unmuting your mic to see if you have any questions.
No, I have no questions.
Great, thanks. Does the expectation of the Capstone Project make sense, Anita?
Yes, it made perfect sense.
Okay, perfect. Great. Danielle, I'm going to see if you have any questions, and I'm unmuting your mic.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thomas, do you have any questions?
Nothing I can think of. I'll just be surprised to find out who I'm being paired with.
Okay. So that's actually a good question. So you as a group of 8, and as I said, I believe it's going to be 8 people, are going to be responsible for the culminating project, which is the IEP development. And the expectation is that you will get together online and you will flesh out how that IEP is developed, right? And so basically you'll all be developing the IEP, and you'll get 1 score based on everybody's contribution to that. But in order to do an effective job contributing to that, you must do all the work, which means you're going to have to do the individual assignments as listed there. You're going to have to do the subgroup assignments, and you're also, as an individual, expected to review all the resources that are found in this folder, okay, which I'll explain in more deep depth when we're done. Okay, so Thomas, you are assigned to the people. There'll probably be close to 8 people who are going to be in your group for the final culminating project, which is the IEP, and then there'll be 4 people in the subgroup assignments for the early literacy, the reading website, and 1 for the Intervention Central website. Does that make sense?
As of right now, it does.
Okay, and it's okay. All right, let's. All right, Torian, I'm unmuting you to see if you have any questions.
No, I have no questions.
Okay, great. Welcome, Sandra. You missed the kind of review of the Capstone Project, but you'll be able to catch up on that when I archive the webinar, so we'll keep going. Okay, so first off, we are in this folder, and let me just share with you again where it is. You're going to go to Course Contents, and the first folder is your folder. That means that everything that is in this folder is your responsibility for learning, knowing, being able to do. The Capstone Project description, which I just walked you through, both the individual, subgroup, and group assignment is listed in that document, as well as all of the resources here for you. Tonight we are really going to address all of these. I'm going to kind of highlight these resources, and then I'm going to address overarchingly the progress monitoring reading resources, as well as the DIBELS resources. Okay? All right, so let's start with what is here. The first, after the Capstone Project assignment, which I shared with you here, the second thing is an early literacy present ed levels for the IEP development. This is what you're going to use to develop the IEP, the culminating project, okay? Now, this is where I'm going to start. These present ed levels are okay, but as you go through your learning through the module, you might say, wow, I would like more information about Angela's ability to do X in the area of reading. And if you as an IEP team want to embellish these present ed levels when you turn in your project, you may do that. But the following is what I'm giving you as a launch point to begin this work. So you're going to see that I have present ed levels, and these present ed levels include this child's total performance. And this child is a student in kindergarten, and I don't have that there, but I should have had that there. I will revise this, make sure you know that this had the age of this student, okay? But this student is in kindergarten, entering kindergarten, and the present ed levels are listed here. And it indicates that the early learning profile is the school districts, and it says ASD, which is Anywhere School District's tool used for assessing children's ability. And Angela received the following scores. In letter recognition, she got 51 out of 54, which means she knew her letters. Her letter sound skills were 0 out of 28, which was below basic. Her phonological awareness skills were 0 out of 33, which was below basic. Her journal sample was below basic. Then there is some indication here in math skills, and I left them in there just to give you a complete picture of Angela's performance, but you're only going to be worrying about developing an IEP for her for the area of literacy. I also added her abilities in executive functioning, her abilities to manage, organize tasks, complete her activities, as well as speech-language skills, which are also critical when we're looking at literacy. So I indicated that Angela was able to follow some simple directions, label some basic concepts and common objects, often does not orient to the speaker when, and as you can see I tried to change the name so I don't have, but you'll get the idea, you'll have Angela and his, but when his name is called and requires prompting to follow teacher commands, he exhibits receptive discrimination for some common objects and pictures but does not always reliably touch items when requested to do so. Demonstrates emerging abilities to identify objects by feature, function, and class, and perform simple match-to-sample tasks. Expressively, she is able to imitate and simple imitative and echoic skills at the word level and number level, letter colors, and a few shapes. She's able to label several common objects and pictures, and her mean length of utterance is 1 word. So basically she doesn't have long sentences. She has difficulty interacting effectively with her teachers and classmates. She enjoys being around other children and sometimes greets familiar people. She does not always appropriately gain listener attention and has great difficulty remaining engaged for very long without adult prompting. She does respond to peer initiation or simple play, and her requests sometimes verbally but often reaching and pointing. She needs a lot of physical redirection, and in a 10-minute period when a sample was taken, she was prompted on average 38 times and verbally prompted 35 times. For the purposes of this, Angela, and I will share this with you, when I give you the I will add this to the top of this. I apologize, it's missing. Angela is a child with an intellectual disability, and she is a child with Down syndrome. Okay, so these are your present ed levels. They are just a launch point. As you go through the learning through this module, you might ask to embellish them, and you might ask to connect them to other resources, and that is okay, because your capstone project is your group's learning and the development of a comprehensive, well-written IEP. So I'm going to close that out, and I will make sure to add the age of Angela as well as her cognitive functioning. Okay, the other resources in here are resources to support your learning. So there's a standards-based IEP PowerPoint. This PowerPoint takes you through training that the Department of Education did to look at how we think about students with disabilities and how we match standards to their IEP goals. Okay, so it gives you some ideas on how you might do that. Okay, I'm going to close that out. This next resource is a resource on dyslexia. The most common learning disability in the area of reading is dyslexia. And dyslexia is defined as a core phonological processing disorder. So this resource will give you resources that the state has put out that supports particularly learning and reading acquisition in the area of core phonological processing, and we'll talk more about that. Tonight we're going to review the progress monitoring PowerPoint, and I'm going to explain that to you and how it links in. Hopefully all of this will make sense as we connect it to. The other area that we will briefly touch on, I'd like you to look at, and these two are connected, is the Guide to Understanding Norm Reference Assessment. This is a website. If you've had me for class before, you understand the difference between norm referenced and criterion referenced. Norm referenced compares you against a normative sample. The more valid and reliable the assessment is, the more representative the sample is. So if you have a very narrow sample of folks who the assessment was normed on, then it's not as valid and reliable as it would be if it was normed on a diverse population. And basically norming means just that. It takes a look at how everybody else who took that test did, and it plots you on a bell curve. And it has you compared to others on that bell curve. The reason that is important is that depending on how the bell curve, how the assessment is normed, as an educator, you are going to be given lots of information about students. And so, for example, at the top it says, in order to interpret these assessments, so for example, this IQ test and or these achievement tests, and I'm assuming that you've had the assessment course as an undergraduate, assessment in inclusive settings, and so I'm not going to go into a lot of details around the differences between norm reference and criterion reference, but if you have questions, follow up with an email to me. But the expectation is that you understand that in most of these assessments, we look at the average being a standard score of 100, with one standard deviation above the norm being, or below the norm being 15. There's also other ways that you could look at this through T-scores, etc. But really the purpose of this is to say, if you see a child who has a full-scale IQ of 65 and you know that the average is 100, and one standard deviation below that is 85, two standard deviations below that would be 70. So a student whose full-scale IQ is 65 would mean that their IQ is more than two standard deviations below the average. This is the verbal IQ and then the performance IQ. So you can see that this student's overall verbal and performance IQ are commensurate with each other. They're similar. So their verbal ability is pretty similar with what they can do with regards to performance when they're given a task. And again, the assumption is that you guys have had this course as an undergraduate with, the assessment text that you would have had, the McLaughlin assessment text. But if you have questions, follow them up individually with me. You'll also see that there are standard scores here for reading, and these are different than the IQ scores. So if you look at the standard scores here for reading, you'll see the student's word reading score is 74. And so what we would do is we would compare that standard score to their intellectual functioning. And if we say their full-scale IQ is 65 and we look at their standard score for reading is 74, here we would say that this student's overall word reading is actually exceeding what we're saying their cognitive functioning is. So they're above their IQ. So we're saying that they're reading above what we're saying their IQ is, which gives us information. It gives us a lot of information. Where you see the word pseudo-word decoding, that means when a child is presented with words that are not real words, the child is able to read them phonetically. It's also called nonsense word decoding. So pseudo-word decoding, this child's standard score was 60. So again, that's significantly below average, below the norm of a standard score of 100. But when we compare it with the child's overall cognitive functioning, it's pretty commensurate. It's below where they were for their full scale, but it's pretty commensurate. And you can go down the list of standard scores, and as you look at these standard scores, you would then compare them with the child's overall intellectual functioning. And that's one of the ways in special education we make determinations around children's present educational levels. Obviously, the school psychologist would be the one administering the IQ tests, but often special education teachers administer these achievement tests, for example, these subtests in the area of reading. So this is the first resources that I want you to review. It explains kind of the importance of norm reference assessments and gives you then this sample psychological evaluation that addresses both a synopsis of those formal tests as well as the standard scores associated with them. The next resource that I provide is a PowerPoint, and this is actually old, but it's a PowerPoint on the Woodcock-Johnson 3 tests of achievement. If you had me for your undergraduate assessment course, we did the Woodcock-Johnson. If you remember it, it was a foldered assessment, and on one side the teacher had a prompt, and on the other side the student would see the stimulus and would respond to it. I have posted basically an introduction to the Woodcock-Johnson for you to see. This is an assessment. It's a standardized norm-referenced assessment that special education teachers might give. you hopefully in your observation setting might see a teacher administer one of these norm-referenced assessments like the Woodcock-Johnson. There are many others. But I want to point you to this resource. If you had me for the undergrad class, you probably you have these resources, but just want to point you to that. If you didn't, and you you should check the course that you took. It would have been the assessment course you took as an undergraduate, assessment in inclusive settings, and you would have been pointed to the standard norm-referenced assessments. This PowerPoint just kind of takes you through one particular norm-referenced assessment that sometimes is given by special ed teachers. It's called the Woodcock-Johnson. It yields standard scores that then allows the teacher or the teacher to compare the standard scores with the normative sample. So how is Angela doing compared with peers who also took that same test? And you will see this pie chart or this bar graph that kind of shows you that in the distribution. So you see a normal distribution. You see the average being where the average is. You'll see that the cognitive assessments are the assessments that would be given by the psychologist. The achievement assessments are the assessments that would be given by the special ed teacher or a reading teacher. Okay, so just like I shared with the website, you can see here if you have the intellectual ability and the achievement ability, you'll see that if there was a difference between their intellectual functioning, like I showed you, the child's overall IQ was 65, but then their reading score was 89, then you would ask questions about that, and that would be something that you would pursue further with further diagnostic assessments in consultation with a school psychologist. This PowerPoint is just a resource for you. If you didn't and haven't gone through this in the past, it might be somewhat complicated. Really, the point here is for you to go through the resource and get a basic understanding that special education teachers often do administer norm-referenced or standardized assessments. However, we are moving away from that in the era of standards-based education. And we're moving away from that when we look at criterion-referenced assessment. Okay. The other area that I provided, the other resource I wanted you to review is the National Center on Intensive Interventions. And again, this is a resource that looks at what supports for students aligned to IEPs might look like, especially for students who need more intensive instruction. The next two resources are the two resources that you are going to be either assigned to. You're either going to be assigned to Free Reading or Intervention Central. This is where you will work with your subgroup, and your expectation is that you will comprehensively review the website as well as answer the questions that are posed in the Capstone Project paper that I shared with you. Here's the first one. The first one is Free Reading, and freereading.org is a research-based open source pre-K through 6 reading intervention program. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because whoever is responsible, the subgroup, the 4 people that are responsible for reviewing this website, you will be responsible for comprehensively going through what this website brings to the table. But I do just want to point a couple things. There's opportunity here, as you're thinking about what Angela, based on her present ed levels, needs, you're going to have to write goals based on what she needs. And how do you determine what goals are appropriate? So if you look at what I just shared with you preliminarily in that present ed levels for Angela, she basically has letter work. She knows her letters. She can identify her letters, but she doesn't have phonological awareness and she doesn't have phonemic awareness. So then you might want to figure out, well, then what would be the scope and sequence of teaching Angela phonological awareness and phonemic awareness? And so as you comprehensively review this website, you will be able to see the types of things that you might want her to do. So for example, in the areas of phonological awareness, what are the things that we want Angela to do? What are the things that we would expect students to do? So it basically lists a kid who has no phonological awareness, what are the types of activities you would have them do? And then it goes lesson 0 all the way through with phonological awareness activities. What's cool about this is that there's educator-contributed activities as well, there's teaching tips, and there's other resources. A lot of these things might help you with what we call specially designed instruction in the IEP, but again, as you go through these resources, these are things you will discover in your subgroup. So free reading is a great resource, and again, it's the expectation that your subgroup will comprehensively go through all of the components of the website and then will be able to answer the specific questions addressed. Okay, you will see that the intervention basically looks at all of these instructional strands and then week 1 all the way through week 40 for students. And it says for kindergarten students who are at risk, which would obviously be the student Angela in the present ed levels, where do you start? And then for students who aren't, and it explains that. So this is a place where you might go to begin to draft IEP goals aligned to the present ed levels that were provided. So this is a resource. The subgroup is expected to spend a lot of time going through here to help the IEP team develop the Capstone IEP goals based on research and based on an appropriate introduction and scope and sequence to the content. Okay, that's the first website. The second website that this other subgroup is going to be responsible for is Intervention Central. This really is a website to help you with the development of further diagnostic assessments and or progress monitoring tools. So I am going to not spend a lot of time here, but if you just click here on CBM, you'll be able to see that there's a whole place where you can create curriculum-based measurements. Here are ones for fluency and letter sound fluency. So for example, if you were working with Angela, you know that she's pretty good in letter sound fluency. You might not need to address that, or you might want to continue to probe and progress monitor for that. You will be able to generate that. You'll be able to generate different oral reading passages, etc. So again, the group, the 4 people that are assigned to that will have an opportunity to do that. On the right-hand side, it features these tools that it just kind of gives you some other things. The Dolch Wordless Fluency Generator is a high-frequency sight word fluency generator, and basically what it allows you to do is to say, you know, students who are pre-primer, so this would be beginning of kindergarten, you would say, you would click on that, and you would decide, you know, I want 4 columns and I want 8 rows. And you decide the font type and font size. So if you have a student who has visual impairment, you might want really large font. So you would click Submit, and you would then develop a high-frequency sight word probe sheet for diagnostic and or progress monitoring assessments for a student who is pre-primer at the beginning of kindergarten who is learning high-frequency sight words. What is great is this is the teacher's version, where you would then say, you know, across this line, was Angela able to read go, can, and, one, etc. You would indicate the numbers, but you can also click here and you can develop the student worksheet. So Intervention Central is a resource that you will use to develop both progress monitoring and diagnostic assessments that you will then incorporate as resources in your IEP. There's other tools that you can develop, and you as a subgroup who are responsible for learning this website and answering the questions will be responsible for sharing with your colleagues what you've learned and then adding to the discussion when you get to IEP development. Okay, so as I said, these 2 resources are the 2 resources highlighted in the Capstone. You know, these are the 2 things that you have to do the comprehensive review of and answer the questions of. These are the 2 resources where you will have subgroups associated with them, but you are responsible for reviewing all of the resources individually that are in this folder. Okay, the next folder is the assessment, is the DIBELS assessments materials. And this is a zipped file, and you are responsible as an individual to go through all of the materials in here. The PowerPoints have clear, I'm going to show you, have clear guidance and direction, and the videos are embedded that show you how these specific assessments are administered. Again, you had me for undergraduate. We went through some of these materials. We probably did it on a very cursory level because our class was 6 weeks. The expectation is that you're going to spend time doing this. This is a zip file, heavy with videos, so it takes a while to download, and I'm actually going to stop downloading it because it's going to take too much. I'm afraid it's going to impede on our webinar. But you as individuals are expected to go through those DIBEL materials and be able to speak to those resources and what potentially you might use for both progress monitoring in the IEP. You should be able to speak to the different assessments and how they link to the big ideas in reading and how they might support the progress monitoring in the IEP. The next two resources are resources that it's imperative you read, especially in the areas of literacy when we're talking about students who are struggling. The first one is by Louisa Moats. It's called Teaching Reading is Rocket Science. And it's a resource that lays out what teachers of reading need to know and be able to do. It lays out the findings of the National Reading Panel. And I know that a lot of you in your undergraduate coursework, you've gone through the National Reading Panel. You understand the need for phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. But it lays out those expectations. It's an important read, and it's critical to this module. And last but not least, here is a resource from Reading Rockets that really highlights, again, the National Reading Panel. And if you are interested in going back and reviewing that from your previous course, it can link you to the National Reading Panel. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and see if folks have any questions about the expectations of your learning in this module. And if you do have a question, why don't I just ask you to type it in the chat box. Just type it in the chat box or just say, I have a question, and I will unmute your mic. I'm going to stop for a second and just see if anybody indicates they have a question. Do that by typing in the chat box that you have a question. Okay, so I don't see anybody with any questions. I'm going to now tonight kind of review an overview of basically literacy-driven assessments. It assumes an understanding of the National Reading Panel. I won't spend a lot of time unpacking these big ideas, but I do want to share with you kind of these overarching concepts. Again, I am really good at responding to emails, so if you have questions, email me, okay? All right, so let's start with, and this is actually a presentation that is going to be administered via webinar by one of my patent consultants this week, so you're getting to see it prior to that. So the objective of this is kind of to review with you the process for determining your focus for reading instruction and progress monitoring, and this will help you as you develop your IEP. What are some of the progress monitoring measures you might use? What are some sample IEP goals, and what are some criteria for monitoring progress, and then what are some research-validated, evidence-based instructional practices? So I'm going to briefly and quickly review this, but again, this is a place for you to go, and actually this would be the first place that you should go when you're thinking about and structuring your progress monitoring tools in your IEP. So when you are thinking about assessment and linking it to instruction, you need to ask some very basic questions. Is there a clear purpose for what it is I'm doing? Are there other environmental variables to consider? So for example, in the present ed levels I shared with you, Angela struggled with following directions, she struggled with some language issues. So those are all important variables to consider. And then, are you going to use multiple measures? Are you just going to focus, for example, with Angela on phonological awareness and phonics, or are you also going to address fluency building, comprehension, and vocabulary? And as you know, a comprehensive IEP would address all of those. I know that a lot of you have seen this before, but in Pennsylvania we have 4 types of assessments, and I know that you've done this in your undergraduate work. This is taken directly from SAS. But we have 4 types of assessments. Diagnostic assessments, which are just that. They're diagnostic. The purpose is to try to figure out what students need. A lot of times norm-referenced assessments like the Woodcock-Johnson are diagnostic, and they give you that information. But a lot of times you also need to dig deeper. The Intervention Central website that I just shared with you has a lot of tools that will allow you to be more diagnostic with students and figure out what they need. Again, as I said earlier, the present ed levels I gave you are just a start. As you do your learning throughout this module, you might say, you know what, I'd like to learn more about Angela in these following areas. And as a team, you can decide if you want to add to the present ed levels. Diagnostic assessments give us information that allow us to align our units and our lesson plans as well as other resources for students' needs. They're intended to be used by educators, but also are very helpful to parents to understand what their students are struggling with. Think about going to the doctor and they give you very diagnostic assessments, try to figure out what it is going on. If you're not familiar with Pennsylvania, it does have a classroom diagnostic assessment also. Right now, the assessment is for students in grades 6 and higher, but the department is in the process of back mapping it to kindergarten. But it is an example of a diagnostic. Other examples of diagnostics can be found on that Intervention Central website that I shared with you. And again, it defines here what information do diagnostic assessments provide. They give you kind of a complete picture of what a student can and can't do, what their strengths and what their weaknesses are, and what you as a teacher need to do to target instruction for those students. Diagnostic assessments are needed in order to develop IEP goals. Formative assessment is just that. That is just what the word implies. It's assessment that is ongoing, it's done in your classroom, and it's supportive of making adjustments on the fly based on the needs of students. Examples of formative assessments are when teachers constantly are monitoring and adjusting their teaching practices. So the use of response boards, random reporter, you don't know when you're going to get called on, response cards, choral responding, group responding, so the teacher can hear if students are mastering the content. This provides real-time feedback to the teacher and allows the teacher to monitor and adjust their instruction. Benchmark assessments are assessments that are given over 3 to 5 times a year, and they determine how students are doing compared to a particular benchmark. Examples of benchmark assessments in Pennsylvania might be the foresight assessment. DIBELS can be used as a benchmark assessment. You will see that DIBELS, for example, in kindergarten might be administered 4 times a year or 5 times a year, and it assesses how a student is comparing against the expectations for kindergarten or the expectations for 1st or 2nd grade. But DIBELS can also be used diagnostically if you understand reading. So you might say Angela's in 2nd grade and I give DIBELS to see how she's doing based on the 2nd grade level. But when I give her the 2nd grade DIBELS, I find that she's really struggling. And I give her then a 1st grade DIBELS, and I might even go back and give her a kindergarten DIBELS to be diagnostic about what she needs. So DIBELS can be used as a benchmark assessment, but it also can be used, especially if you understand literacy diagnostically. And all of you will after you go through the DIBELS training materials that are found in Blackboard. And then last but not least, summative assessments are assessments that are kind of done at the end of a set duration of time. Sometimes we call them autopsy assessments because they give you information, but it's often too late to do anything with. So it's not the type of information that you can use to drive instruction. But it does give us information as to whether or not students have mastered important content standards. So these are the 4 types of assessments in Pennsylvania. Again, this chart is for your use and review as you go back. So now this is where we get into some really strategic thinking about what it means to develop a comprehensive IEP for kiddos who are struggling in the area of reading. So when we think about reading, we've got a lot of things at play. This is called the Scarborough rope, and it kind of is a really good image of how all of this language and comprehension are inextricably tied. So when we look at this, we know that there's background knowledge, and students need to have background knowledge, and background knowledge is needed for language comprehension. We know students need vocabulary, and that is needed for language comprehension. We know that kids need to understand syntax and semantics. Syntax is grammar and how words and sentences go together, and semantics is making meaning of that. Kids need to have verbal reasoning, so they need to be able to understand metaphors and make inferences. And then they also have to have literacy knowledge. They need to understand print, concepts, genres, etc. So that's the language comprehension piece. Down below you'll see the word recognition piece. This is phonological awareness, kids being able to hear syllables in words, hearing that elephant has 3 syllables. Being able to hear phonemes or individual sounds in words. So cat has 3 phonemes, k, a, t. That's phonological awareness. I know that if you've had me for classes before, you'll say that phonological awareness is anything you can do in the dark. Phonological awareness has nothing to do with print. It has to do with the student hearing the syllables and the individual phonemes. When you map the alphabet to phonological awareness, that's when you get decoding, or the alphabetic principle, or what is often referred to as phonics. So the next component of word recognition is decoding, when you match the letters to the sounds. And that's where we get what is called the orthographic pattern. Here is the picture of the letter. So this is what the letter O looks like. This is the picture, and then this is what it sounds like, ah. So the student that makes that connection, that's the decoding connection. As I shared back when I showed you the slides around Wilcox-Johnson, one of the assessments that are given in those norm reference assessments are what we call pseudo-word assessments. The purpose of them are to see if the student, given a nonsense word, a non-real word, is able to appropriately target the letter-sound correspondence and the most common letters and sounds. And last but not least would be sight word recognition of familiar words. And that's where Intervention Central, where I just shared with you and took you to that resource where you can look at what are some pre-primer, primer, first, second, third, fourth grade most common high-frequency sight words. Typically, they don't follow traditional phonetic patterns. Kids need to memorize them automatically and fluently. What are those words? Again, that's an important area of literacy. When we look at language comprehension and word comprehension, we recognize that as kids develop more language, they become more increasingly strategic in their approach to that. As they develop word recognition, they become increasingly more automatic and fluent. And as those two come together, fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text, that is what a good reader is. That's what a good reader does. So as you're thinking about the needs of your students, and for the purposes of this final IEP, it's for a student that is a very young student that is really learning very basic skills. But as you go through education, we want to be looking at all of the areas listed on this slide and assessing diagnostically where students are, especially if they're struggling in literacy. And again, this would be something that you, as a special ed teacher, would work in consultation with the school to dig deeply and deeper in the area of assessment. As you are in your observation sites doing your 20 hours, I want you to be in your log reflecting on whether or not you see the teachers you're working with assessing these different areas. These are the areas and the strands that are woven together to ensure we have skilled readers. So we know that there are multiple reasons for kids struggling in the area of reading. So with the example of the present ed levels I gave you, the student is able to look at the letters, but we also know that this kid has cognitive functioning and language issues. But basically, you can have a student has strong decoding, but poor comprehension, poor decoding and poor comprehension, poor decoding and good comprehension. And good readers are the ones that are in this upper right-hand quadrant. They have good decoding and good comprehension. So if a student has issues in these areas, reading intervention might be needed. Phonological deficits, basic decoding and encoding. Decoding means I see the word decoding and I can decode it, decoding. And then I hear the word decoding and I can encode it, which means I can spell it. So if you said to me what spell decoding, encode decoding, I would spell it D-E-C-O-D-I-N-G. So basically, decoding is reading, encoding is spelling. We know that kids might have phonological deficits. They might have difficulty with basic decoding and encoding. They might lack automaticity with the component skill of reading. Letter names, sounds, words, phrases, sentences, and connected text. So sometimes we're good at getting students to be fluent at the word level, but they struggle at the sentence level. And then sometimes they struggle even more at the paragraph level or connected text level. We also know that students have low oral language and vocabulary. If they do, we need to work on that. If they've got issues in morphology, that's where we take components, the smallest meanings of words. So we think about prefixes and suffixes. You might want to address that. You might need to address comprehension of sentences and connected text, background information and knowledge, and comprehension skills and working memory. Notice that the text in red are things that are the language pieces, and in blue are the word attack, word decoding pieces. So if we go back to Scarborough's rope, word recognition and language comprehension. Blue is word recognition, red is language comprehension. So our challenge as educators is to determine the areas of reading difficulties, determining appropriate assessments for those areas, determining how to effectively instruct, and then make timely instructional decisions to make sure that you're not wasting, if a kid has mastered a particular concept, you're moving that instruction along and your instruction is timely and meeting the needs of the student. So again, you can see the Scarborough rope here again. We see that skills most often measured in screening assessments, initially diagnostic assessments, are assessments that look at this word recognition area to make sure that kids are increasingly automatic. But we also have lots of students that struggle in the language comprehension areas. Measures of vocabulary and oral language are not as predictive of reading disabilities, but many students often have problems with these areas. So we know that these areas here, word recognition, are very predictive of kids with learning disabilities in reading, but kiddos that have problems here then often have problems also in the language comprehension area. So what is reading comprehension then? Reading comprehension looks at a child has to have intact language skills, which means their oral language, the knowledge of language structures, vocabulary, as well as cultural influences. And we talk about English language learners and non-native English speakers. Reading comprehension assumes that students have fluency. What does that mean? It means that the student can read fast enough to make meaning from text. You're going to spend some time learning about DIBELS and oral reading fluency probes. They got a lot of bad rap in the past, but they actually are grounded in a pretty significant body of scientific research that shows that students who don't read fluently cannot access meaning. So a student who reads like this, by the time they get to the end of the sentence, don't remember what they read. So it's not about students speed reading. It's about students reading fluently enough so that they can access comprehension. When we think about students reading fluently enough to access comprehension, we think about fluency in a lot of different ways. We look about fluency not just at automaticity or their rate, but we also look at whether or not they're prosodic in their reading. And if you look up the definition of prosody, it means expression. So a lot of times maybe our children with autism are reading through text, but they have no expression in what they're reading. And that often is an indication that they don't understand necessarily the text. So they might be fluent enough, they might be automatic enough, but they are not prosodic, they're not expressive. They blow through punctuation. And that is another area of fluency. We know that kids need to be accurate, so just because you're fluent doesn't mean you're accurate. And accuracy is a really big thing. So, in order to determine a child's instructional level in reading, it's really critical that they're accurate. And if you struggle in your accuracy, even if you're reading 90% of text and 10% is wrong, 10% is a big deal, you're reading text that is too hard for you. Okay, reading comprehension also assumes background knowledge. And background knowledge is built by life experiences, content knowledge, activation of prior knowledge, knowledge about texts. And then we also have students understanding and self-regulating, and that really has to do with what we call metacognition. So how are students motivated and engaged by the reading? You've heard lots of stories of students who really struggled with reading, and it wasn't until they got turned on by a particular book that they became engaged. Motivation is a critical factor, and for struggling readers, where they're constantly struggling with text that is difficult often for them to decode, reading is not a fun activity. One of the challenges then to do as teachers and as parents is to find ways to get kids excited about it, and that means often reading to them, finding books on tape, etc. So in areas that they're interested in so that they build background knowledge. teaching them active reading strategies, monitoring strategies, and fix-up strategies. So really this slide kind of gives you the big picture on kind of a gestalt or a schema for understanding reading comprehension and the link between language, fluency, metacognition, and background knowledge. When we think about determining areas of reading difficulty, we need to use diagnostic and progress monitoring assessments. Diagnostic assessments kind of unpack what students know and don't know, and they help us with instructional planning. So that will help you with the development of your IEP goals. In your present ed levels, you'll see that Angela has 0 out of 48 in phonological awareness. As you go through the tools that I've given you, you might say, well, let's say we gave her this additional assessment and it gave us this information. And that's something that you as a group will determine yourself if you want to embellish the present ed levels. But basically, you are able to get further information that are going to drive instructional planning through diagnostic assessments. But then, per the IEP, you're going to have to constantly be monitoring whether the IEP goals are being effective. So you need to put in place progress monitoring tools. Check out that Intervention Central website. Check out the DIBELS resources. You as a team are going to determine what tools you're going to use to monitor Angela's progress in the goals that you've established for her, how frequently you're going to monitor her, and what you're going to do for students who are below benchmark. This slide kind of just goes into more detail on the different types of curriculum-based measurements. As I shared with you on the Intervention Central website, you're able to review those at your convenience. When you're monitoring progress in skill development with mastery, you need to look at test accuracy in writing the alphabet, phoneme segmentation, sound-symbol association, reading words with specific vowels, irregular words or sight words, which that Intervention Central site, classifying vocabulary words by semantic categories, and meaning of morphemes. Again, as you go through the Intervention website, you'll see different tools to do these things. Typically, 1-minute measures give us a pretty good benchmark, and you'll see those resources when you go through DIBELS. So what measures do I use? What are their purposes? What are the instructional expectations? And then how do you determine the student's needs and their response to instruction? So again, you're going to see this slide where we talk about the components, and you'll see all of these component areas, and the person or the subgroup that's assigned to the Intervention Central website will get resources to support all of these areas. So you can decide how you're going to prioritize the goals you develop as a group. So here's an example of phonological process with a sample IEP goal. And again, this is where you're going to spend time going through these yourself. Here's an example of accuracy and an IEP goal. Here's an example of what an oral reading fluency probe, this is a 3rd grade DIBELS probe, might look like with the benchmarks listed below. So a student who's reading 92 words or higher is at low risk for reading failure at the end of 3rd grade, or whenever this benchmark is. Actually, I think this is the beginning of the winter to 3rd grade. Here's an example of what 6th grade looks like. The next area would be fluency. Here's a sample goal for that. And that kind of shows that. Here's a tool that a lot of schools are using, which is called AimsWeb, which is similar to DIBELS, and it allows you to kind of graph, put into place a program, and then monitor whether there's changes in it. Here's the DIBELS oral reading fluency tools. So that's for phonological awareness and fluency. Here are some resources you can use for comprehension. Again, all of these can be accessed in the Intervention Central website. Here are examples of things that you can use for vocabulary. Here's the list down here as a resource that you can use for CBMs for vocabulary, as well as Intervention Central will allow you to develop those. This is for more of your own information, and something that I think is very valuable and something maybe worth purchasing for your own to have as a teacher. This is a great assessment. Actually, there's a great vocabulary screening in it, but if you look at the actual book on the left-hand side, it's called the Core Literacy Library. It's a book, it costs about $50, and it has a list of diagnostic assessments in all of the areas of literacy. Really gives you different versions at different levels, really can be administered different ways, really awesome. Once you get information around vocabulary, you can look at the data in different ways. Student class, you can use a scatter plot of the class, or you can look at the class chart and looking at that. Here's a way to graph the data. I'm going to let you guys review this. The CDT isn't a measure that we're using. I wanted to put this in here. This is in here because it's used at the upper grades. It's important that you're aware of it because Pennsylvania is going to be backmapping the CDT to kindergarten, but not yet. So CDT is the Classroom Diagnostic Assessment. This is kind of for your information. So we're going to skip through that. Okay, so then the question is, you develop this IEP, how often are you going to monitor progress? For students with disabilities, you want to be monitoring progress weekly. So you want to indicate in your IEP how frequently you're monitoring that progress, how frequently you're measuring it, and then what will your progress monitoring reports look like. Another area and assessment that is given to our students who are English language learners, and I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that, is Access for ELLs. Access for ELLs is an assessment that is given to ELLs in the areas of listening, speaking, reading, writing, oral language, literacy, and comprehension. And it looks at their acquisition of English based on the proficiency levels over here on the right-hand side. So a student who is entering, a student who's beginning, developing, expanding, bridging, and reaching. Reaching means that they are getting ready to be dismissed from ESL. If you are not familiar with Access, you need to check out the SAS portal and look for the curriculum frameworks and the ELL overlays. Again, this is more information for you. It's not specific to the IEP development because obviously in the present ed levels I didn't indicate that Angela was an English language learner, but it is important that you also are aware that ELLs and ELL assessment data needs to be considered if you have a student who is an English language learner. So for the purpose of this capstone assignment, you don't need to address it, but you need to be aware that it is an area of need and it needs to be addressed in the IEP if you have a child who's an ELL. Okay, so that just kind of lays that out. Okay, so the next resources kind of just give you some ideas as to how you might plan, for example, a kindergarten student, how you might look at what general ed might look like, and then what you might do more diagnostically to figure out what kids need. So the following schemas lay out the 5 big ideas in reading: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, language, vocabulary, and comprehension. And then it basically says, you need to, in, for example, kindergarten and beginning of first grade, do benchmark screenings for nonsense word fluency, phonological awareness, words correct per minute. And you need to see if Angela is in the middle of kindergarten, how does she compare against her grade level peers? And then based on that, you make some decisions. So for example, if on those grade level benchmarks, you see that she's below benchmark, you need to look at different resources. If she's below benchmark in phonics, in nonsense word fluency, you need to do something more diagnostic, okay? You might need to look at whether or not she's struggling in phonological awareness, and if so, you might need to do some things in the areas of instruction and getting the child to hear syllables, or onset rhymes, or phoneme segmentation or blending. So anyway, you can see through this schema, it kind of lays out what you need to be considering instructionally based on how students do. And here's another schema that looks at 1st to 2nd grade as we expect the skills to progress. And here then is just a schema for all students. Review different resources. If they're not at benchmark, get diagnostic. So go to Intervention Central, go to the core assessments, figure out oral reading fluency is poor, accuracy is good, check instructional level. Like, what percentage of the words are they reading accurately? Look at their high frequency and irregular sight words. Implement fluency building. If they're struggling in oral reading fluency and their accuracy is poor, you might need to look at more advanced phonics and multisyllabic word reading, etc. So this is kind of an overall schema for all students. The other ones were specific to 1st and 2nd grade. Kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. So then what do we think about when we're looking at IEP goals and objectives? The first thing we need to do is look at the condition. Under what situation are we going to expect the child to perform the behavior? Obviously the student's name, the clearly defined behavior, and then the performance criteria. What's the criterion level? The percentage of time, the number of times, number of trials, the number of times the student must do it, and then the evaluation schedule. How frequently are you going to be assessing that specific skill? So here are some examples. In 30 weeks, Jose will complete a 6th grade maze prompt with 95% accuracy in 1 minute on 4 out of 6 consecutive weekly probes. Again, you're going to have to indicate how you're going to be measuring this. In 10 weeks, Jose will orally read 110 words correct per minute in a 6th grade passage in 1 minute with 95% accuracy on 3 out of 4 consecutive weekly probes. Intervention Central will help you with the development of the progress monitoring tools. Free reading will help you figure out what it is you might be assessing and what you might be developing those diagnostics and progress monitoring tools for. Last but not least, we need to be thinking about what are the specially designed instruction, what are the evidence-based practices that we're going to use, and we really need to look at the data around interventions that are grounded in research. So what we know, especially for kiddos who are struggling in acquiring reading skills, we know that the teacher needs to be explicit and systematic in their approach to reading. They need to provide step-by-step instruction, ongoing reinforcement, and modeling. You know, this is the letter A. It makes the ah sound. What sound, everybody? Ah. Your turn. What sound? Anita. Ah. Good job. Your sound, Danielle. Ah. Good job. And so therefore, you're getting lots of feedback, and you are providing the students with opportunities to respond, become more fluent. Feedback is one of, we know from the research, the top 3 influences on student learning. When we look at feedback, this is that formative assessment. It's the most powerful instructional practice. It's the teacher giving specific targeted feedback on what the child did well and what the child needed to do to improve. It's not an I gotcha. It's not a grade. It is, this is the letter A. It makes the ah sound. The student says ah. The teacher says ah. What sound? Ah. Then gives the child another practice and goes back. Tries another trial with other students, does some group choral responding, then goes back to the student who was struggling and sees if they've mastered that skill. Providing systematic targeted feedback as to what the child does right and what the child doesn't do well is the key to teaching effectively. When we tie student goals to tasks that they complete more effectively, and then give systematic feedback, students acquire, maintain, and generalize those skills across settings. We know that feedback that only says good job or bad job is ineffective. Feedback has to be specific to what the student did well and specific to what they needed to correct. And if it isn't specific, saying good job till the cows come home, only praise, has no impact on student learning. So as you think about what specially designed instruction is going to be in this IEP, you need to really be thinking about what are the evidence-based practices and instructional practices that you're going to use. And in the IEP, it says what kind of specially designed instruction are you going to use to teach the child? You need to look at that. Here is a slide on ELLs. As I said, for the purposes of this capstone activity, you're not going to be addressing an ELL because the student you have isn't, but these are the things that you do need to consider when you consider ELLs. Instruction needs to focus on providing ELL with opportunities to discipline-specific practice. So learning English in the content areas. They need to be practicing in reading, writing, speaking, and listening in social studies, in science, in health and physical education, in gym class. It needs to be across those areas so that the student is not only learning the English and practicing the English, but they're practicing it in content discipline-specific ways. The instruction needs to leverage the child's home language and cultural assets and prior knowledge. So if you know that you have students that are from a particular area, you address that. You are culturally responsive to that child, and you are able to then motivate that child by bridging that gap and connecting them to making meaningful and comprehensive understanding of the language. And we got to make sure that our ELLs are getting access to standards-based instruction at rigorous and grade level and appropriate, but with the appropriate scaffolds and supports. So although for the purposes of this assignment you're not dealing with ELLs, it's critical that you understand that. Instruction for ELLs needs to move forward by taking into account their English proficiency levels, and I share that with you. It needs to foster their autonomy by equipping them with strategies that help them and the things that they can employ themselves. And it also, the instruction needs to be diagnostic, allowing the teachers to consistently monitor and adjust how the child is acquiring English. Here are some considerations for ELLs and progress monitoring for them. Remember, the purpose of our progress monitoring is to show whether students are making progress the expectation is that some type of data collection is frequent, and as you can see with the students, it's being collected on a weekly basis, and it's allowing you to determine whether or not interventions are what the interventions are and whether they're meeting the target. You can see here that week 1, it indicates, the red line indicates what the goal line is. It looks like an acquisition of about 1 word correct per week. And then if you look at the words correct per minute, you're going to see that this kid's like all over the place. So it doesn't look good. The child isn't making progress compared to the goal line. So we need to be asking, okay, well, what's going on intervention-wise and what can we do differently? This is the type of data you need to be collecting when you're progress monitoring for students' IEPs. We also need to consider intervention changes, obviously, if the work isn't, if things aren't working. So where do you find these research-based instructional practices to make changes if you have data graphs that look like that? I have posted a lot of resources in Blackboard, but here this slide also shares some additional resources. Okay, the following resources are all for you for additional information and tools that you can use. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I just want to see if folks have any questions. If you do, just type in the chat box that you have a question, and I'll unmute your mic. Okay, I don't see any questions, so what I'm going to do is say, what are our next steps? I just want to put it in here. Okay, so there is an individual responsibility component to this Capstone project assignment. That individual responsibility is that you review all of the material in Blackboard in the folder. So that means you go through the DIBELS training, you read the materials that I presented, you go through the PowerPoints with the training notes. So you are a good team member. You've done due diligence. You've learned the content, so you can contribute to the discussion. You then do the individual, so you look at all those materials. You also do the module, the IRIS module reviews, and you are going to be expected to answer the questions associated with those module reviews, and the answers to those questions are going to be shared with all of your team members so that they don't have to go and do all of those modules themselves. You as a collective will share what you learned through those online resources. I will, based on tonight's webinar as well as students, I will randomly assign Module 1 through 8 to students. So you will be each given that. I'll put that in the email following tonight's webinar. Then you will be assigned to subgroup. One subgroup is going to be responsible for the assessment website, which is that Intervention Central site, which is where you will go to develop probes and or progress monitoring tools for your IEP goals. Another subgroup is going to be responsible for the free reading website, where you're going to go and figure out, well, where do I even start? Like if Angela really needs to work on phonological awareness or phonemic awareness, what would be the skills that I would build an IEP goal from, okay? And what are those kind of goals? So you're then going to do that. These two subgroups then are going to work together and say, well, this is what I found on the Intervention Central website around ways we can measure phonological awareness. And then the folks that went to the free reading website are going to say, well, this is the scope and sequence for introducing phonological awareness skills. We start with syllabication. How might we measure that? So both groups are going to be responsible for doing due diligence in learning the content in each website, what each website brings to the table, and then you're going to connect as a group to see how you're going to as a group, based on your review of the IRIS modules, your subgroup work, as well as your individual review of all the contents in the module, how you're going to develop as a group the culminating activity, which is the IEP. So my next steps for me is to send an email after tonight with a link to this webinar, and individually assign each of you to the 8 modules and to the subgroups. Your job then as a group is to work collaboratively together to come up with times from between now and the end of the course where you are going to take what you've learned, share the IRIS modules, share the subgroup material, and then ultimately work together to collaboratively develop an IEP. I will assign both the module, randomly assign the module, individual module assignments and the subgroup assignments for the free reading website and the Intervention Central website. But you as a team will have to decide how you're going to meet. I can facilitate through Blackboard. I can facilitate through GoToMeeting. You can set up Google Groups. But you as a group are going to have to figure out how you will go about collaborating, sharing what you've learned so you can complete the final project. So I am not going to dictate, how you do that, whether you meet face-to-face, whether you meet online, whether you meet in a group. My responsibilities: assign the modules for individual accountability, assign the subgroup. Your responsibility as a group is to connect and to share what you've learned and then develop the IEP together. Just so I can monitor what is going on, you will see that throughout here, so part 1 is this individual assignments. Once you have answered, so for example, if Anita was assigned classroom assessment, she's to do this module, she has to answer these questions. She's going to share the answers to these questions with her peers, but you are also going to submit them via the direct submit folder in Blackboard. And I'll share it with you where that is in a second, so that I can keep track that this is happening, okay? And I'll be able to keep track based on your individual accountability and the group accountability. So that's the first part. The second thing that you're going to do through the Dropbox is the second assignment, the second replacement assignment, which is the review of free reading and intervention. You're going to do a comprehensive review of the website, but you're also going to answer these questions because that's what you need to bring to the table to share with your peers collaboratively so you can then do the final goal project, which is the IEP development. Okay, so I am going to stop there and see if folks have any questions. And if you do, just type in the chat box, and I'll just go through each of you since there's only 6. Anita, I'm going to unmute you. Do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. Danielle, are you okay?
Danielle, are you okay? I'm okay, thank you.
Okay. Trisandra, are you good? I don't know if you're having a problem with your mic, Trisandra. I just unmuted you. Okay, Thomas, what about you?
I'm good.
Okay, and Torian, are you good?
I am good.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys joining me so I didn't have to talk to myself tonight in the webinar. I'll be following up with the archive and the assignments, and the rest will be up to you guys. So have a great night.
You as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.